The Charlotte Ledger Podcast is a member of the Queen City Podcast Network.
Hey, it's Tony Mecia with the Charlotte Ledger, and you're listening to the Charlotte Ledger Podcast. You can find out more about the Charlotte Ledger at thecharlotteledger.com. And if you like what we do here, sign up for our insightful morning newsletter as a free or a paid subscriber, or tell a friend. Spread the word, spread the love. This episode of the Charlotte Ledger Podcast is presented by South Park Community Partners, an independent nonprofit organization whose mission is to lead South Park's advancement by driving economic vitality, creating memorable experiences, and ensuring an extraordinary quality of life. Visit southparkclt.org and follow South Park Community Partners on LinkedIn and on Instagram and Facebook at South Park CLT to learn more about the ways South Park supports the Charlotte region's economy. Today, I'm talking with Douglas Welton, the chairman of the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Planning Commission. We're going to talk about Charlotte's growth and development, some of the changes we've seen in Charlotte, and where it's all heading. Douglas, thanks for joining me today.
Thanks for having me, Tony.
I appreciate you coming on. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. I just think it's so important and it's so interesting because the topic of growth and development in Charlotte has been, I'm pretty sure, the most critical issue in the city for decades. And that's because it's connected to so many other things, right? Like affordable housing, well, it's driven by growth. Transit and transportation and traffic, driven by growth. We got all these new restaurants and speakeasies and doggy daycares. Yeah, that's all driven by growth. So a lot of Charlotte's success is driven by the growth, and a lot of Charlotte's challenges are also driven by the growth. And you, as the chairman of the Planning Commission, have a front row seat to that and some sway in how the city grows. And correct me if I'm wrong on this, but the Planning Commission is a panel of volunteers appointed by the city and the county that's essentially an advisory committee on growth planning and rezoning and land use, right? So you're talking to developers, you're talking to city staff, you're talking to residents. I mean, you and I ran into each other at a community meeting a few weeks ago for a rezoning. And so, okay, all that said, I make no pressure. I mean, it's a big topic, but like, how do you think about Charlotte's growth?
What I think about Charlotte's growth is that it is inevitable. Where we are in the country right now, people are streaming into the places where there are thick environments for jobs and opportunity, and Charlotte happens to be one of those places. And the stream of growth that we've seen in the last 25 years is incredible and outpaces almost any other place in the country. Like you said, that's the source of a lot of great things. You know, if you're not growing, you're dying. And so we want to be on the growing side. It does present us with some challenges, and you have to go forward with an eye on not just meeting today's challenge, but you've got to meet challenges that are going to be around 50 years from now, 100 years from now, gospel according to Douglas says 100 years from now, because what's going to happen is, you're going to make a road, and that road's not going to go away in 10 years. It's going to go away in, 75 years perhaps, or maybe not. And so we want to make sure that we're making smart choices going forward or doing the best that we can.
So what in your time since you have first been in Charlotte till now, how would you say Charlotte has changed? What kind of changes have you seen over the years?
Oh, one wants to say exponential without using exponential in the scientific way, but obviously the change is significant. I remember when Tyvola was the end of town, was the end of Charlotte. When I moved here, I moved to Pineville, and the Charlotte City Limits sign was way up South Boulevard, and it's not there anymore. And obviously the growth out has occurred. One of the things is that there's more than one center of activity and creativity and vitality in terms of urban life. South End or Plaza Midwood or NoDa. There was a point where none of those were really a happening place. And the notion of having 3 or 4 or 5 places like that was not on the map. And so that's changed significantly. From a business environment and the climate, there was a time when everybody went to their work uptown, let me use the right word for that. And uptown was very corporate and clean and nice, and everybody had a job and they worked there. And now it's like, I talk to my friends that are in some of the tall buildings downtown, and they're trying to figure out a way to not be noticed when they didn't get to work for the 2 or 3 days that they're prescribed to be there. So, those are the types of changes that have happened. Obviously, we have professional sports here, which we didn't have when I came. It's a town that gives people something to celebrate and to kind of make a community out of. I would say that, as American culture has changed, people have come into their own little groups, and this group over here doesn't necessarily want to mix with that group over there, and so those cliques have a different feel than they did in the 80s. So
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, I got here in the late 90s. The changes are so profound. I mean, some of the ones that you mentioned, I remember the old, Hornets Stadium arena was out on Tyvola, like
Yep.
that, you'd get out of there, there'd be like, 5 lanes of traffic going one way coming in, 5 lanes of traffic going the other way coming out, you go to Jock and Jill's or whatever afterwards.
When I arrived, that was a landfill. If that puts it in perspective, the entirety of what's Renaissance Park was a landfill. I-77 coming into town was 2 lanes going both ways, north and south. So, is traffic worse? Or, I avoid traffic. That's how you make traffic better.
Right. You leave early or late, or you telecommute, or you find some other strategy. I don't know how the people do it who commute these long commutes at 5 o'clock going out 77 into Valentine or down Providence Road or something like that. I mean, those are
you just don't do it, and and people do. And that becomes one of the issues that we have to deal with growth, is that for a long time, Charlotte grew out because we have land here. We have more land we're not landlocked like Manhattan. You're on an island with water. You can only do so much with that. But if you look at the city limits now, it's almost to the county line all the way around. We're not going to eat the towns that are around Pineville, Matthews, Mint Hill, et cetera, et cetera. That's the way that is. But in the 80s, it was perfectly normal thought that you would get a job and that you would live 15 miles from your job and you would simply drive in. I worked for a large computer company, and we often had people relocate here from Massachusetts or the Northeast. And the office was down on Arrowwood, exit 3. But numerous folks said, you know what, I'd like to live 30 miles away from here and drive in every morning, because that was what they were used to, living in another town and perhaps taking mass transit in. And it seemed like, well, you just get on the interstate and it was the same thing. I don't think that that's the mentality of people moving to Charlotte anymore. The notion that I should get as far away from where I work as possible and then drive there. And if that is, and it is for some people, that becomes a challenge as we go forward, because you can only put so much asphalt on the ground.
Yeah. I mean, we have also seen the creation of a lot more employment centers. I mean, you mentioned sort of the old school mentality was you drive to uptown, in the morning and drive out at night. Now, you've got all these other places. You've got a big office park in Valentine. You've got South Park. You have the University City. You have all these places now.
Yeah, Westinghouse Boulevard is an incredible center for employment, and people don't realize that, because it's light industrial or heavy industrial, and it's not as sexy as a tall bank building. But if you ever try and go somewhere on South Tryon at 5 or 6 o'clock, well, I think the Southern expression is, well, bless your heart, because it's just a challenge. So that becomes the issue with growing out. So, and yes, you got to run more utilities out. And I believe it was 1996 when the city council did their values and visions adventure. And what they did was they said, you know what, we need to start growing on the inner part of the city as opposed to continuing to grow out. And that policy has kind of pervaded up until now, the notion that we need to make sure that we build densely and smartly, as opposed to just, hey, it's empty land, let's build something on it.
Well, let's talk about that a little bit, because that's the sorts of a lot of these, contentious rezonings that you have. I think it's sort of different opinions on that, and how that changes the city. You and I ran into each other a few weeks ago at a community meeting for a rezoning along Providence Road near Charlotte Latin School. And so, there were residents there, and they were saying, hey, look, if you build a few hundred apartments, that's going to make the traffic even worse, that it's already intolerable, that it's going to overcrowd the schools, and you see these kind of arguments. This is not a unique argument. This is plays out all over the place, many, every month or more. Yep. And, but the developers say, look, we want to build several hundred apartments. This is our land. We're allowed to develop land, and the city needs housing. And so how do you reconcile those two different perspectives on the planning commission and just, as you try to explain this to folks?
Well, one of the things, the reason you ran into me at that meeting was I went out with another commissioner, Shauna Neely, and I said to Shauna, let's go take the temperature of the people that are out in this area. And I go out and I just sit, hopefully unnoticed, in the corner and just.
I think they did call you out at one point.
Called me out. Yeah, Ed doesn't know my not be noticed part thing, but maybe now he will. Anyway, I sit and I try and just listen to what people are saying about the rezoning and understand what their perspective is. One of the things I find quite often is that people don't have a full viewpoint of what's going on, and what they don't know about, they will make up something that's absolutely horrible and will cause Armageddon in their backyard. It's fine. I'm just listening. My priorities in terms of trying to get zonings through and to get the city to a different place in terms of housing supply. When I see a zoning, I'm very much predisposed to let's create as much housing as we can possibly create. That's one of the things that I believe we can do. There are rules. We have all these, the categories of place types and things of that nature. And if it is allowed, if it is in a proximity to things that are transit, if it's in proximity to the goods and services that people are going to buy, are there things that are close by that people can play and that sort of thing, then I'm predisposed to kind of say, let's build more housing here. And if the roads are capable of accommodating it, or, it's like along the light rail or whatever, a bus route, then I tend to want to go ahead and let's say, this is the type of thing that we need because the city has a policy that basically says, let's increase our housing supply.
So do you think do those residents, do they not understand that, or because if you talk to residents, they'll say, I'm not against developing this land. I'm concerned that I don't want a 6-story apartment building. Yeah. I don't know how it's going to look, and they're going to cut down the trees, and it's going to create 2,000 more trips, and it's already congested. I mean, those are actual things. Yeah. But do they, I know, and you're sort of charged with seeing the bigger picture. Do they not see the bigger picture? Do they willfully ignore the bigger picture? I mean, I have some sympathy because I get the idea that I've lived here and it's been a certain way. And now you are going to want to put in a bunch more houses and it's going to change that. Although I do think that, frankly, if you live next to a 10-acre wooded lot and you love seeing the deer and, graze on the bushes or whatever in the morning as you drink your coffee, in Charlotte, I don't know that you should have an expectation that those deer are always going to be there and those trees are always going to be there. But I do have some sympathy for people who don't want their next door change. I understand that. So how do you explain that?
The way it is yes, those folks have those opinions, and I try and explain to them that there's at the core, the rules that the state has given the city to administer for zoning are really very simple, and every piece of land has entitlements. You can do something on every piece of land. As if you are your brother's keeper and you can keep this developer from doing something on property that you do not own, he can do the same back to you. And so we have to understand that each person that owns a piece of land, the entitlements go with the land, not with the person. And if you have a calm conversation with folks about this, usually in small groups, you can get to that point where the understanding is there. Sometimes you cannot. I've been in community meetings that were raucous and the crowd had no intentions of hearing what the petitioner had to say. And that's fine, but people I think they don't have the understanding in terms of the long-term perspective. That may not be important to them at that time, but in the long-term perspective, when land is developed, you either get your say and say it now, or you don't get your say and you get whatever you get. And we see that sometimes where people are very adamant about what they don't want in their neighborhood, but they don't realize that by right, a developer can put up a project that may not be a beauty, and it may not give them options to control the things that they could control, the residents. And so, the best you can do, one of the things I've done this year is I've gone out to everybody and their mother and tried to speak in front of those folks and say, hey, here's how the process works, because there is a deficit of knowledge in terms of how the process works. People will, again, what they don't know, they'll kind of make up and insert their own version of it. But when you go out, a couple of months ago, I went out to Steel Creek, the Steel Creek Residents Association, and spoke to 100 or so people and said, here's the way that it works. Now, were they ultimately that happy with me? Perhaps not everybody, but at least they have a little bit of knowledge so that when the yellow sign goes up with the blue Z on it, their hair doesn't immediately catch on fire and they're not calling somebody being wronged. And I've done that all over town all year long, and I will continue to do that. And that is the most that I can do. Hopefully, city councilmen are doing the same thing. People at every level of staff and government officials should be doing that sort of thing. Gospel according to Douglas.
We'll be right back to the conversation. But first, this episode of the Charlotte Ledger podcast is presented by South Park Community Partners, a nonprofit organization whose mission is to lead South Park's advancement. Right. Yeah. I mean, getting the word out on how it works and what you can do and what you can't do and how the process, you will have a chance to be heard. You can, contact your representatives. You can speak at a public hearing. There are lots of things that you can do. I mean, do most people not really know what that process is until they are in it? Is that what it is? Yeah. I mean, I know you see this all the time. I see this all the time. We know kind of how these things work generally, but I'm guessing a lot of people are not necessarily tuned into that unless they've been through it, right?
No, most people aren't. There are one or two people in the neighborhood that perhaps are the sharp ones in terms of knowing the process and understanding, but sometimes they don't have the voice. And so my goal is to try and, encourage any of those folks who do have the voice to put it out there, what this understanding is. And then once people see that there's a process, I also encourage people, you know what? I tell people, look, I'm on the Planning Commission website. You got my name. I'm that guy. Just go find my email and send me a note and I'll see what I can do for you. You don't have to wait until the public meeting or, that sort of thing. I encourage all neighborhoods to go out and talk to developers the minute that they know something is happening in their neighborhood. And you can find this information is all publicly available. And if developers will go talk to people beforehand, which is one of the things that we were able to do here in Madison Park, was to talk to developers before they put up the condo project. So they were asking us, what kind of siding do you think we should put on this thing? That's the place that you want to be, because what that allows you to do is if you have that input, if you have that influence, you can make a better project for your community. And so I want people to do that as much as possible. And then they won't have to worry about what we do on the backside because they will be in control on the front side.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. People ask me sometimes, like, what can we do? How do we fight this? And it's like, well, if you get in the discussion and you can get in early, and usually most developers, I find they will reach out to the neighborhood before they file anything. They will at least sound some people out. And, they make changes. It's not like they put in these plans and that's the plan that they start with and that's the one they're ending with. I mean, they will make changes. City staff will insist on changes. Residents will insist on changes. And they are flexible to a point, and sometimes the numbers just don't work if they have to change it too much or reduce it or something. And you're going to get some pushback. But there is a process, right?
Yeah, there's a process. And in the end, it is a math problem. The developer has to lower their cost enough to be able to make a profit, which they're entitled to make. And they have room. No developer comes to the table and says, oh, this is my last and final offer. Negotiation is about understanding what people want on either side and being able to provide some compromises that allow you both to get to a win-win situation. And that's what I'd like for people to take away when I say go out and talk to developers. Find the win-win. If you go into it, so often I'll go to a neighborhood and they're like, oh, developers are evil, mean people. They're only greedy, looking out for money, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, that's not helping. It isn't getting you to a win-win situation. If you go in thinking the other guy is Satan incarnate, all you're going to get is more Satan incarnate. So, win-win. think about it. It's like the right thing to do.
Okay, so you talk to developers a fair amount. You also talk to residents. What are some of the trends you're seeing as far as what developers are up to these days?
I don't know that real trends. We had a planning commission meeting yesterday, and one of the things that I saw that was a trend that kind of bothered me a little bit was that single family detached housing, the curve was going down a little bit. And it's like, okay, people still like detached housing. That's great. We're seeing a lot of townhouses being built, and that's something that's interesting and possibly a very good thing just because of the economics of it all, and what that will allow a generally younger population chooses townhomes, and that's a good thing to have those things happen. We have other issues in the city, related to understanding that Noda and Plaza Midwood and Elizabeth and Dilworth are not the same as Steel Creek or University City, and understanding that all of those places need to participate in helping us create new housing supply, but maybe all the residents in all those places have a very different view on how we go forward to increasing housing supply. And so that makes for an issue. The development.
Are you saying that, like, for example, do you get less resistance in Steel Creek and University City to apartment complexes than you do, say, for example, in Dilworth?
I'm saying that the traditional suburbs where you have cul-de-sacs aplenty are perhaps not. Everybody fears that somebody's going to drop South Boulevard in their backyard. And that's not necessarily going to be the case. That kind of density to the South Boulevard is not what needs to happen on Grand Palisades Parkway. I'll just call that one out, right? Okay. But there are other kinds of density that do belong in that area and would be perfectly fine and acceptable if somebody wanted to do that. Similarly, we could go up to Mallard Creek Road, whichever one it is, I can't remember, one of the Mallard Creeks up there, and do something similar. And people have begun to do that because the university's there and the university needs housing, and that has caused a lot of things to be created up that direction. There's empty land, and that empty land has a value. And generally, those places further away from town, the empty land has a lower value in terms of price. So it can be acquired at a better cost formula for the developer. And so that's where we'll see that kind of development take place. That doesn't mean that premium housing where the land is expensive is going to go away either. So,
So what are the areas in Mecklenburg County that you see as sort of, I don't know, what do I want to say, up and coming, or where we're going to see a lot more activity? I look at the rezoning filings every month, and it's a little bit scrambled now with the 2040 plan. But it used to be like Mallard Creek had a ton. There were so many in Mallard Creek, and I don't know, are there other particular areas that you would keep an eye on where you're like, hey, wow, that's new, that's different?
I saw a graphic, and I can't quote numbers from it, but obviously South End at one point in time, and this graphic was from last year, had the greatest number of development requests. And there are still a lot of development requests coming in around the light rail on the south side of town. Mallard Creek, obviously, at one point in time, was a leading edge place in terms of the number of rezonings that we were seeing out there. And I think that a lot of those are in process right now. The last several months, I honestly feel like we've kind of smattered them all over town. One of the districts we hardly ever have rezonings from is District 6, which is close to where I am. And I think we've had two in the last couple of months here that it's like, oh, well, but that's, when you use the zero and you see one or two, that's like, oh, that's interesting. Is that a trend? I don't think it's necessarily a trend, but the areas around that we think of in terms of traditional growth of South End or up north of town, Noda area, North Tryon is on fire. There
like
are
the Sugar Creek area, that what you're talking about?
Not quite. Atondo Boulevard. And they're doing some improvements on Atondo Boulevard, but I knew that
like by Camp North End you're talking about?
No, other side. North Tryon. We've done four projects over there, or four rezonings, and they are all for a mixed use, innovative mixed use district, which helps transition old light manufacturing to other types of districts, not necessarily residential, but perhaps some kind of mixed use. So I believe there's going to be an extensive amount that's right there at Atondo. I know that we've put a couple on North Tryon, 28th Street, 26th Street. There's a Starbucks up there now. It's obvious. That's an obvious signal that something is about to happen.
So what is the big story that nobody's talking about?
The big story that nobody's talking about is, I will go there. It's the UDO. Okay. And people are talking about it in a lot of different ways, and everybody has an opinion about it. And in terms of the UDO, the question is, do we give it a chance to work? We've passed it, and are we going to leave it alone and let it actually work for some period of time? Or do we screen and make adjustments every single time that somebody has an issue with it? And I will say that this is the story that nobody's talking about, because people are talking about it. We have text amendments about the UDO that are flying through right now, and the UDO changes at a regular cadence about once a quarter. But the policy behind it was very much driven by city council and how they voted on that policy, the 2040 plan. That was a 6-5 vote. I say this out loud all the time. You couldn't have a worse vote on something like that. And we see people reminding us of how they voted in terms of the 2040 plan all the time. Well, the question is, how long can you live on reminding us of how you voted before you do something else? And are those folks ready to do something else? Are they willing to do something else? And what would that mean if you really did have some serious changes there? What if you could no longer maintain the charm of your neighborhood, which is obviously one of the most controversial things in the 2040 plan? But how would people react to that? And again, it's kind of hiding in plain sight, because there are easy things to talk about it, but the hard stuff isn't necessarily being discussed.
Yeah. How do you think that the 2040 plan and the Unified Development Ordinance, which sort of put the teeth into the 2040 plan, how do you think those are working out? And I understand it's called a 2040 plan for a reason, in that this stuff doesn't happen overnight, but it's really sort of set out a vision saying, here's how we want to see the city. We want to see it, more walkable. We want to see people living closer to where they work. We want to see more transit options. It's a big list of things. But how do you see that progressing? Is it progressing the way it's supposed to? Are we making progress? Are we sort of standing still? How would you characterize that?
In a lot of ways, it's too soon we're 2 years into this. It's a little bit too soon to notice. I mean, 10-minute neighborhoods don't materialize overnight. The process of doing neighborhood character overlays for those neighborhoods who kind of want to put themselves in amber and freeze where they are is just beginning. So those things have to be understood. I believe that you said that we have a vision, and I'm not sure that the 2040 plan is a vision. I think it's a plan. And I said this to you when we met the other week. Nobody remembers Martin Luther King's "I Have a Plan" speech. All right. We remember visions. And honestly, one of the biggest visions that we remember here in Charlotte, or that we live from, is the notion of world-class city. And people say that all the time, but when Sue Myrick said we want to be a world-class city, and this is back in the late 80s, people lost their minds. I just remember reading, Rolf Neal had written a letter in the Observer about how we were world-class. And it's like, you got to be kidding. But people continue to say that. When you go out and you listen, they say, well, if we want to be world-class, that's the vision that Charlotte has. And it has nothing to do with 10-minute neighborhoods. And so the question is, can we come up with something that's cohesive as a vision that we can all buy into? Then your strategy changes from year to year to accomplish the vision, as opposed to having a plan which just sets out a set of steps that you follow, and a vision, lets you follow with your heart.
All right. Well, Douglas, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks, Tony.
Okay, that's a wrap. To our listeners, thank you for listening. Charlotte Ledger Podcast is produced by Lindsay Banks. This episode of the Charlotte Ledger Podcast was presented by South Park Community Partners, a nonprofit who leads South Park's advancement by driving economic vitality, creating memorable experiences, and ensuring an extraordinary quality of life.
QueenCityPodcastNetwork.com